This is going to be a speaker shootout, so to speak, of 10 speakers. I have a few of them on the list. Some of them I actually have a review for individually, so check those out. I don't have the speakers sitting here, obviously, but I am going to talk about them. My goal is to try to find a speaker that's a good speaker and try to keep it at around $1,000 or less. So sometimes with a sale price, that's going to really help to just take the to take the price and just pull it down even more and potentially make that speaker even more attractive. So I'm going to go through the list that I have over here, and I'm going to also talk about these speakers. I'm going to kind of talk about the reasons why you would purchase each of them and maybe reasons why you wouldn't purchase each of them. So just try to stay with me through this. It's going to be a pretty long video, I'm sure. So on my notes, I do have a couple of speakers listed that are not here. So the first one that I do want to mention is going to be the Monitor Bronze 500. Check out my video for that. That speaker has two 8-inch woofers. It typically sells for about $750. You know, you could get it on sale, of course, for less, $650, who knows, maybe even less. But, you know, that speaker does have two 8-inch woofers, so it's a much more well-balanced speaker because of that. The tweeter on that can be potentially a little bit bright. You know, if you're running an amplifier that's a very warm amp, a very laid-back amp, that sort of thing, you know, that speaker may be right for you in that price range. That speaker can also be good for movies. I found it to be good with music. Again, this is the Monitor Bronze. Pretty well-rounded speaker overall. The tweeter sound was pretty wide. Again, I'm going off the top of my head. That's not on my list. So that speaker at $750, that might be a nice option. The next speaker that I want to mention is going to be the Definitive Technology 9020. Now this speaker is the smallest of the bipolar towers. It has a 150 watt amp connected to an 8-inch woofer. So this right here, this is the 7600. This is the old version of the Definitive now 9040, which is next on the list, but I put it here just to kind of show you this size comparison. Anyway, back to the 9020. That speaker typically sells for around, I believe, $600 or so, maybe $700. When there's a good sale though, you could typically get that speaker for $200 less or more. So that's a great speaker to keep in mind. It would be good for a small room, a bedroom in particular, a room where, you know, you don't want to use a sub, but you want pretty nice movie theater sound. One of the great things about the bipolar series from Definitive is that they have drivers in the front and they have drivers in the rear, in the back of the speaker. Okay, the subs are on the side with passive radiators. Now the 9020 does not have any passive radiators, but it does have the front drivers and it does have the rear drivers. But as we go up in the series, you know, these speakers either add size or they add drivers. Okay, so the next one I'm going to talk about, I might as well continue with Definitive Tech, is going to be the 9040, which is the new version of this speaker right here. The 9040 has two, and I believe this is 4 1/4 or something like that. There's a mid-range, mid-bass driver here, tweeter here, and there's another one here. Now in the back over here, it just has a tweeter and the mid-range, but it also has, and right here is where I have my hand, this is where the powered sub is. So on that one, of course it's right here, okay? The 8-inch is right here, and then the passive radiator, there's one on each side. There's one on each side. And I think because, again, I'm talking about Definitive, I'm just going to continue. Now that one, the 9040, that one typically sells for around $900 or less. You know, that's a speaker that I've seen for in the 600s as well. You could potentially maybe grab it in the 500s on a great sale. So just keep that in mind. That speaker is really excellent for potentially a medium-sized room, something that's maybe 15 feet wide by 20 feet long, maybe even a smaller bedroom. You know, if if you really want to rock, 300 watt 8-inch sub built into each speaker is going to give you fantastic sound in stereo mode. It's also going to make the receivers sound good. So if you have a receiver that's a low-powered receiver, that's a great feature of these definitive speakers, having that powered sub, okay? Because having that built-in sub built into the speaker, your receiver doesn't have to work as hard anymore because it doesn't have to power the bass. It just has to power the treble and the mid-range. So if you have a low-powered receiver, just keep that in mind. They're also great in large rooms. When you get to this one, this is the 9080, okay? This is the 9060. The 9080 has a 12-inch. This is the 10-inch version, the BP 9060. So it's got a 10-inch here. It's got the 2 passive radiators here and here. And remember, passive radiators are only powered from the active speaker. So it's not really powered from anything. So when the active speaker moves, it makes the passive radiator move. The passive radiator isn't connected to anything, so it needs the other speaker to move. It needs that pressure. It needs that air to move it. Otherwise, it won't move. So this speaker, the 9060, okay, this one has, like I just mentioned, it's got the mid-range, the tweeter, the mid-range up top, and another tweeter in the back. This has a 300 watt amp. This is a 10-inch woofer. Normally sells for $1,200, but you could pick this up on a good sale for in the 900s, the 800s, even into the 700s. So just keep your eyes open for that type of a sale, because picking this up for in the 700s, 800s, to me that's a steal. Why would you purchase these speakers? That's probably the big question. Well, number one, if movies are the number one for you, like that's a top priority. You just want, you're purchasing a home theater receiver and you're saying, my number one goal is to have really good, excellent, great movie theater sound. Well, these do that. Okay, this speaker blows me out of the water when I watch movies with this. And I'm not saying that the bass is blowing me out of the water, but the overall depth, the overall sound stage. So what happens with these speakers is the front drivers take the sound and send it to you. The rear drivers hit the back wall. So you got to pull them out a bit. You want to pull them out at least a foot from the wall or so, maybe even more, to really make the sound as spacious as possible. So when these rear drivers hit the back wall, it creates this like wall of movie theater screen sound, which I find to be just really impressive. Not only that, but the overall sound quality and balance of these speakers is really excellent. I don't find them to be ear fatiguing at all, especially with movies. A little bit more on the warm side, okay? Now the smallest model, the 9020, that one would probably be for a small bedroom. I would put that in, like a 10 by 10 bedroom, a 10 by 13, something like that. If the room size is more like, let's say, 15 by 20, something like that, then I would go with the 9040. So that way you're getting the 300 watt amp and the 8-inch. Or go with this one, the 9060. The other reason for purchasing these would be, your home theater receiver is kind of low powered, right? These work great with like any wattage receiver because again, they have that amp built into the speaker. It powers the sub. So your receiver isn't powering the bass, so to speak, the speaker is. So the other sounds that come out of your front channels as well should be as clean as possible because your amp doesn't have to work that hard. So your amp only has to power these little mid-range and the tweeter. It can be a very cost-effective speaker, right? Now for music, that's typically where the debate comes about. Are these good for music? Should you use them for music? Well, I love them for music. I'm grabbing my water. I love them for music. I think they sound fantastic. They don't sound quite as, straight at you as these speakers do. They have a bit of a different sound. The sound is is a wider soundstage, I would say, but because each one has its own sub, you know, you're hearing like the full range of the music. You're hearing the kick drums. There's no question about it, like with, you know, these speakers on the end, where, you know, the kick drum is really, really weak for the most part, because, you know, they have 6.5-inch woofers. So just, you know, keep that in mind. So those are really my reasons for purchasing these with the amp, these Definitives with the amp built in. Next speaker on the list would be the Kef Q950. That one has 2 passive radiators, and it has 2 active 8-inch woofers built into the speaker. You could see my review of that as well. That speaker has a very different sound to it. That speaker costs $1,000 each. So when you think about $1,000 and you compare it to some of the other ones, just, you know, try to keep that in mind. Before purchasing that speaker, you know, you might want to purchase the Monitor Bronze 500 because it's much cheaper. That is, if you want a speaker that doesn't have its own built-in amp. You're looking for something a little bit more direct, something that might be, you know, a little bit more for music, especially if your amplifier is excellent to power it. The Kef Q950, I found it to be very unique sounding, because it from the front it's very wide sounding, but my issue was the top part of it was very strong. So just watch the video for more information about that. The top of it, because it carries the mid-range and the treble and the bass, it just sounded almost like a bookshelf speaker sitting on top of maybe, you know, some bass modules, you know, because again, the receiver is powering the bass. That speaker does have very good bass, because let's face it, it does have 4 8-inch, but only 2 of those 8-inch are powered from the receiver, and only 1 8-inch is going to be powering the 2 passive radiators on the Kef Q950. I didn't notice anything harsh or bright with that speaker. It also seems to be pretty good with movies. It was pretty good with music, but it has a very unique sound. Let's see, the next speaker, the Paradigm, the Monitor 8000F. I do have a video for this as well, so check it out. That has 3 8-inch woofers that are powered by your amplifier, your receiver. I found that speaker to be extremely warm. If you want a speaker that's, I mean, I can't picture that being ear fatiguing to really anyone, unless maybe, you know, the amplifier particularly makes it ear fatiguing, but I had it hooked up to the Onkyo, and I mean, it was a very warm sounding speaker, a great speaker for people that want to listen to rock music, and probably also a great speaker for movies as well, because it's so tall. I think it was about the same size as these right here. I think it was like 45 inches high or so. Maybe it was even a little bit higher. Maybe it was 47. I don't remember, but that speaker usually sells for $800. So, you know, there's a lot of speakers right now that are in the mix, and, you know, catch it on a good sale and you could potentially save hundreds of dollars more. The Polk Audio R700. Now this speaker, I would compare this speaker to the Kef Q950 because they're both $1,000 each without a sale. I would say you could potentially put the Paradigm Monitor in that category as well, even though it's $800, but it has 3 8-inch woofers that are powered from your receiver. This has 2 8-inch woofers powered from your receiver. Much like the Monitor Bronze has 2 8-inch woofers that are powered from your receiver or your amplifier. Now, between the Polk Audio, the Kef, or the Paradigm, there's a bit of a sound quality difference between all of them. The bass, I mean, the Paradigm sounds really good. The Paradigm might have the best bass of all of them, only because there was 3 8-inch woofers being powered from the receiver. but if not, the Polk might be pretty close because of the power port. The Kef had nice bass as well, but because of the passive radiators, it might be a little bit calmer. When it comes to the sound quality of them, again, the Paradigm was very, very warm sounding speaker, right? This speaker's, I'm going to say neutral to maybe neutral warm. So this speaker has more details, especially at low volume, than the Paradigm did. The tweeter on this is also a little bit more bright than the Paradigms, okay? But, you know, this tweeter, I'm not saying that this tweet is a bright tweeter, because by the standards of, for example, the Bowers and Wilkins next to it, you know, this tweeter is much more, I find it to be controlled in the brightness, and because it has these 8-inch woofers, you know, the sound balance is nicer. You know, the Kef, the tweeter on the Kef was pretty soft. I didn't find it to be ear fatiguing, but the Kef has a very different sound to it. It has a bit of, this wider, fanned out sound. So it would really be, I think, a matter of opinion. I do think, as far as quality goes, this Polk is made the best. I mean, it's heavier than either of those. This Polk is 79.1 pounds, whereas the other ones, I think the Paradigm, I'm trying to remember, I think that was like 65 or 70 pounds. That speaker was pretty heavy too. It was because it was a big speaker. And the Kef was much lighter than the others. I think that the Kef was in the 50s, but you know, you could look that up anyway. I mean, as far as materials go, I mean, this thing just, it's heavy. It feels like a small tank. I think that the materials used on the speaker as well seem to be the best. It has a pretty nice soft rubber. It's got a long throw woofer. The port on the bottom is nice. But the Paradigm has 2 ports on the rear. So it, you know, it's going to also depend on where you're placing it. I think that either of the 3, it's just going to come down to a matter of personal taste. If I had to pick one between the Paradigm, the Kef, and this Polk, that would be a tough one. It would really be a tough one. But I think, my opinion, I like this Polk the best because I think it has the nicest sound balance overall, right? But, you know, it depends on the, you know, the price that you pick it up at. Polk is pretty well known for running sales, you know, so you could probably catch this at a good price. The other companies might run some sales as well, but Polk is usually pretty big on sales, the way Definitive is pretty big on running sales. Let's see, what else? Okay, so the Bowers and Wilkins Anniversary Edition 603 and the Focal Chora 826. These speakers are very close, but I think that the Focal Chora is more a competitor to the Bowers and Wilkins 700 series than to this 600. So why would you purchase the Focal? The Focal is really clear. The Focal has the best instrument separation of any of these speakers, but the bass is just not there. So you figure this, you know, with the bass, you're looking at, you know, down to 70 hertz in my opinion from, you know, the tests I did with the test CD, plus listening to it and trying to make it sound better with the EQ. So this speaker is really just like, if you want really great clarity, you want to hear a lot of instruments, just really fantastic detail, this is it. And especially for music, okay? If it was going to be a system more so for movies, but let's just say movies and music evenly, you know, maybe the Polk then. maybe the Polk, maybe the Paradigm, the Kef, maybe. Again, trying to find some kind of an even balance. The Bowers for movies, I wouldn't put it there. The Bowers, I think, is mostly, the way I see it, a matter of taste. Okay, this is really going to be a matter of taste based on how it sounds. The company sound, the Bowers and Wilkins sound that they put into it, because it does have a unique type of, like this sound a lot of times when listening to, music. It has a bit of a, like a horn sound, but not like a horn tweeter sound, but that type of a sound, that the way it projects it, and like the way some of the voices kind of sound a little bit sharper than they probably should. I think that really for music, this would be, a matter of preference. As far as movies go, the bass is similar to the focal. They're both neck and neck in the bass. I think the focals, the sound quality of the bass, just think it sounds better than the sound quality of the bass on this Bowers. Now again, I think the focal is more in competition to the Bowers 700 series, but the 700 series, the bass is better than the focal. I've listened to the 700 series, so the bass is going to be a little bit better than the focal, but at 1,100 per speaker and at 1,000 per speaker, you have to keep that in mind. So again, this speaker is over the 1,000, but you wait for the sale, wait for it to come down, and then buy it. The same way, you wait for these to come down, and then you get a great deal. That's when you say, for example, I have a $1,200 speaker, but I paid $800 for it. That's when the speaker is a really fantastic deal. And then I guess with this, if the amp does break, at least then, in the future, if I was adding a sub next to it or something, I'd be like, okay, I paid, $800 for the 5 drivers up top, but I mean, it has a warranty. This is, I'm getting sidetracked. I do want to just add, I do want to add one more thing before I close out this, this video. The fact that I listen to these with a 120 watt amp, Onkyo, the RZ840, and the Marantz 7013 at 125 watts a channel, I would like to hear them with more power. So, a speaker like this with 150, 200 watts a channel, 250 watts a channel, 300 watts a channel amp, it's going to sound very different than it did with 120. But the nice thing about testing these with the power that I do have is it's much more mainstream, because when you look at all the receivers that sell for underneath under $1,000, most of them are going to be 50 watts a channel, 70 watts, 80 watts a channel, 100 watts a channel, 110 watts, 115 watts, and so on. When you get into the 120 watts, typically you're starting to move over the $1,000 price. I mean, I know there are receivers out there where they're like, whatever they are, 5 or 7 channels where the wattage might be 120, 125 watts as well. But in general, trying to find a receiver that, maybe I should say 9 channels or 11 channels, you're typically looking at the the $1,000 price point and over. So I would like to have heard all of these speakers that are not powered. I mean, these would probably also sound better as well with the additional power, but especially all the speakers that I mentioned that are not powered, I think that that could change things as well. But the overall concept and logic of these speakers really isn't going to change, because the bipolar design that this has these won't have. They'll never have that type of spacious sound, kind of turning the wall into a big speaker. So just keep that in mind. If it's purely for movies, I think if it's purely for movies, I lean towards this right here. And again, depending on the room size, the definitive. This is the 9060, the 9040. The 9020. I mean, this is the 7006. This is the old model, but I'm using it to represent the 9040. So I think that, depending on the room size, much like with these, I feel like these are much better for, maybe some kind of a bedroom, but definitely a room where there's carpeting, because these tweeters can be a bit strong. The Bowers tweeter I feel to be a little bit stronger than the Focal. The Focal tweeter, to my ears, is a little bit more pleasant, a little bit more controlled. But again, I didn't have a problem with the tweeter on the Kef, the Paradigm. These definitives have really good tweeters. Sometimes there might be just a tiny bit, a tiny bit of sharpness depending on the music that I'm listening to. Although it's not very hard to adjust, I could use the EQ and just kind of get rid of it. But I think that they sound really good with music as well. But I do think that, potentially movies first with these definitives. But, it depends on, who you ask. I love them for music as well. So, don't think I'm saying, don't buy these for music. Because, having that built-in sub, plus the fact that these go up to 40 kilohertz, you have that whole range there. And plus you got the mid-range drivers and all that. So you have a full range. All of these tweeters, though, all of these tweeters are going to, function fine for music. I don't think any of them are going to produce sound that, isn't going to be sharp enough. Probably the calmest of the tweeters here may be the Kef and the Paradigm. If you have any questions, throw it down into the comments section. I do appreciate you watching this video, and please don't forget to hit the subscribe so you can see more videos like this, like that, as I put them out.